Chill here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and the moon is conjoining Chiron, Jupiter hours, Saturn day, midheaven 10 degrees Aries, Mars 22 degrees Aquarius, ascendant ruled by the moon, and Jupiter is retrograding in the first house. Well, one thing that this moon Chiron in Aries brings, and this is a time to honor astrologer and energy healer Tom Jacobs, who passed away. And one of his teachings, and he was talking about um, suicide prevention with a notion that accepts suicide as self-determination. Of course, we have to add the caveat of ritual abuse programming. Again, be informed of that and have access to choose life. So, one of the things that Tom Jacobs referred to, um, actually regarding the solar plexus chakra or the belly button area chakra, and that was, I alone define who I am. And that has to do with the concept of individual self determination, without which there is no self determination. Now, I'm situated and broadcasting from a country that has, um, by worldly standards, effectively committed genocide in a country or in an entity that desires to be a country. And I can't really say that either in Israel or in Palestine, sovereign self determination on individual level was a costume. In fact, one could even not be who they are without facing either castration from society or literally chemical castration, even though who they are does not violate any other human right. In fact, those that do, they enjoyed full immunity. And Chiron in Aries brings the wound around sense of self, individual self determination. And we want to think about things in society where people tend to define for people who they are. And try to impose that definition. Now, even real estate has to do with that, accessibility to resources, human rights, and so on. Those type of affirmations, because Aries is the I am. And here's the thing, with Aries, we really want to focus on the I am. And the I am, the self determination, is where that sense of self is. Um, no matter how unhappy we are with the sense of self and sovereignty of another person, okay, and again, I'm not talking about violation of human rights or violation of sovereignties. No matter how unhappy we are that somebody has a sense of self, that has their own I am, it is no justification within the perspective of the self to leave the scope of the self, of the sense of self, and to try to define for them who they are. In fact, perhaps for some, the wound of Chiron may have expressed itself at just this fashion. Now, if I take it from, let's say, extortion cult logic, then they would, let's say, rape a boy and call that boy a whore. And they would also do that to girls. Because they would do also forced gender changes and castrations, then in any case, the raped would be the whore. And this is a play that doubles the loss of sense of self. It creates an illusion that the power is not in the I am, not in the sense of self, not in self-determination, but in domination over the sense of self of another. Now, if I can find myself in that as well, where people were um, calling the people who say no crazy, outrageous, and so on and so forth, then I say, okay, that means that the person who calls a person crazy when they not benefically react to their boundaries being violated, that person who violated the boundaries could also be called names. And there is also place for diagnosis in the behavior that violates sense of self of others, even by the juristic principle of the soft skull. So 222. So I'm saying that not out of judgment of people, but more as a self-reflection that our identity, our sense of self, and honoring Tom Jacobs is in that notion of I alone define who I am. And that can be both healing that is beyond reclaiming, and again, I don't outrule reclaiming for everyone, for anyone, um, that is beyond, it's beyond even shifting the blame. And again, I don't outrule shifting the blame. Chiron here is at the end decan of Aries. If the middle decan was indeed the tipping of the scale, and that was about the time where we would have um, the blame, or handing back the shame, or handing back the blame. And now perhaps there can be, if it resonates, a call to move beyond that and integrate or reintegrate our own sense of self. Chiron here invites us to think who we are. Had we not been in trauma ever, who would we be? Because therein lies our sense of self. Not throwing away whichever being informed of, let's say, the evil in the world. It also reminds us, before Neptune, we have about 15 years before Neptune reaches this point in Aries, but it reminds us to keep in mind that for our mental health as well, or psychiatric well-being, I alone define who I am is also a statement of recovery, not just management of, but coming back to our senses, as coming back to our sense of self, as coming back to our I am, which is recovery. Trauma, violation created dissociation, fragmentation of the identity, of the sense of self. So the curation is the I am, which is the authentic I am. How would the I am be like when we're not violated? Now, relationally, and we're still within the scope of the eclipse that was with Venus conjoining Rahu and has a heavy relational undertone. We can only be sovereign being in relation, or either, with ourselves, but in any sort of relation, we can only have a happy relation or satisfying relation or even a sovereign relation with those with whom we can be who we are, and the notion that I alone define who I am is respected. Now, this pertains to relationships with doctors, as doctor-patient, because we have the co-presence of Neptune. Again, with every ingress of outer planet, particularly in the 0 degree, there is eureka, gnosis, and for many people, each and every one, and I invite you to share your intuitions about Neptune in the 0 degree Aries, and perhaps we'll meet in a decade and a half, and maybe some of the things that I say sound, come on, but in 15 years would sound different, and maybe some of the things that you have to say to me would be like, wait a second, what? And then in 15 years, I would think back and say, wait a second, now I get what they were talking about. There is something about this Decan of Aries that goes beyond smear campaign and the response to the sense of self. to a balance between self-assertion and union. Okay, Venus, Mars. And to curate the Lacanian self-definition that says, I am not black, therefore I am. Or I am not white, therefore I am. Okay, this binary definition that can still be kind of like a simplified self-determination. Okay, in children, my first aromatherapy teacher, Shiri, um, taught me that she would look at her children, and at about age 6, 7, 8, they begin to say things like, I am older than my younger sister, but younger than my older brother. And this is also the solar plexus development, where the self-determination is created by comparison. And so the wound around that can be um, that let's say, what if that was a single child? And while this comparison to our surroundings is the first initial stages of being of the reckoning that there are also sovereign others, we also want to rely on our sense of self, because the next sign, Taurus, is already about being. If we have self-assertion in Aries, with Taurus, we're about being. The relaxation of drinking a cup of coffee, relaxed, of sitting there with a cup of coffee, watching nature, listening to the birds. Okay, that's being. And by the way, at that place, the I am relaxes into embodiment. So, but all of this joy of being is has a little prerequisite, and that's that sense of self. Now, a lot of our economy is based on trying to deprive people of their sense of self and supposedly pay them money to basically not have a sense of self under the guise of freedom. Now, those tricks are very convincing, and they're always accompanied by many names. Also, the response, but the actual safe and free state that we seek is not found in controlling another. And yet it can only exist when our boundaries are respected. It's the logos of Aries that one way or another we come to. If I think about the journey of Chiron in Aries since about 2010. So it was fighting to get recognized as a cuckoo because my suffering needed recognition and it had affected my sense of self, to the handing back the shame, or if I have went to deal with my cuckoo, then I expect you to deal with your cuckoo when you try to violate my boundary. And oops, wait a second, when my boundaries are not violated, I'm actually much less of a cuckoo. Two, okay, let's think about a situation where none of our boundaries are violated. Who am I then to the almost fluent transmission to Taurus, which is who, like, I'm not even asking that question at that point. I'm smelling perfume that I made, um, relaxing into feeling the underneath of my heels. It's very sexy. Um, Try that. For those that don't have like their feet, so think about, if you have your other limbs, then I don't know, the root of the palms or the back of the neck. If you don't, if you don't have the back of the neck, then I guess I'm talking to a humanoid. So it's both coming from a point of self-reflection and transcendence. Transcendence of the identity boundaries, not from dissociation trauma and loss of sense of self, but actually from honing in on that sense of self and embodying that to transcendence. The world from a different point of view. And I hope that it is of inspiration and that it resonates and that more and more people can embody that, including myself.